I'm back again, my friends, with yet another great interview, so slide in and sit back and enjoy the show. Here we go. All ones. Okay, today on All Ones, I have Jason Hardy. Who's the line developer over at Catalyst Games for Shadowrun? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, you pretty much covered it. I'm Jason Hardy. Hi, how you doing? I'm the Shadowrun line developer with Catalyst Game Labs. Been happy to work there for a little over a decade now.
Oh, wow. Um, could you tell us a little bit how you got into gaming?
Oh, how I got into gaming. Geez. So it was probably my friend Tom's fault back in elementary school because we had similar interests. And one time he told me there's this game where you can be a knight in a fantasy world and do whatever you want. And there's rules so you can do it and fight monsters and all that. And I was like, why don't we have that game? And how come we're not playing it right now? So he got Dungeons and Dragons. Probably the red box.
Mhm.
And we were playing that. I got the red box not too long after, so I got to use my black crayons and color in the numbers on my dice. And that's what started me on that path, is playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was 12 or so.
Oh, wow. How'd you get involved in game development?
Um, Kind of accidentally. No, I got lucky. So I met a guy when I was in my 20s who worked for FAFSA, a guy named Randall Bills. And since he worked for a game company and I loved games, I was like, well, not only can I be friends with him, but I should use my friendship to try to get a leg in this industry. And he actually was able to find an opportunity for me to do some work for FAFSA. And then once I had a little foot in the door, I just kept trying to push it and push it and push it and find ways to keep doing work because it was a lot of fun. I've always wanted to be a writer. And so writing games was a great way to stay involved in that, in writing, and also stay involved in games.
Could you tell us a little bit about your work at FAFSA?
So I got a message from their editor, and she said they needed someone to write a book, a novel, in a month.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she had heard that I had written a novel, and I'd been, wanting to be a writer. So just on my own, I'd written a novel. And she figured that that was a sign that I knew at least how to write a novel because I'd completed one. So she threw a Crimson Skies novel at me. And so I wrote that novel in a month. Thankfully, at that time, I had no children, so that helped a lot. 3,000 words a day for 30 days and had a 90,000 word novel.
Oh,
And
wow.
she liked it and said, after she read it over, she said, this was fun. Would you like to do another one? And I said, yeah, absolutely. So I did another one. And then she was like, we'd love to move you into other lines that we have. Are there ones that you're interested in? And I said, yeah, Shadowrun. And she said, well, Shadowrun's very competitive. A lot of people like to work on Shadowrun. And I said, that's the one I want. And so I went and had a conversation with the line developer at the time, Mike Mulvihill, and we talked about some ideas. And I pitched to him, and he said, that's a great idea for the game 3 years ago. Here's what's going on in the game now. So I tried to update my proposal, and then FAFSA shut down.
Oh,
And my novels never came out in English. They were licensed to companies abroad, so they came out in German. I have a
mhm.
lovely picture near my desk of the German book covers. But that's kind of how I got the ball rolling, and then it was chasing after that. But yeah, so I did Crimson Skies when FAFSA was operating, and then when Battletech and Shadowrun transitioned over to FanPro, I did work on both of those properties and then continued working on them as they moved on to Catalyst.
Have you worked for any other companies or games outside of FAFSA IPs?
Yeah, I did a little work for AEG back in the day, back in the D20 boom, when everyone was putting out
Mhm.
D20 books. You could just send pitches and try to get on with people doing D20 work. So I did some for AEG, I did some for Fast Forward Entertainment, and then some other miscellaneous things. Like one of the most fun things, and this was like a dream come true, was when the Dark is Rising movie came out. I always loved that series of books. Um, they were doing some kind of tie-in websites with the movie where you could build out the world a little and do some interactive things. So I got to write some stuff for websites for the Dark is Rising, which was a lot of fun.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. Would you like to talk a little bit more about that, or?
I'd have to remember.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
I wish that movie had been more successful and they had a whole series, but sadly the box office kind of killed that line right there.
Okay, how'd you get in with Catalyst, and when did you start working on Shadowrun?
So I've been working with FanPro, as I mentioned. So I've been doing some editing for Shadowrun and writing some Battletech fiction. And then FanPro, the license transitioned from FanPro to Catalyst in a process that's long and complicated and was fraught with tension. And but once it transitioned, I kept working for it because a lot of the same people who were in charge of the lines for FanPro were in charge of the lines at Catalyst. So I was able to keep working on both those properties. And then in 2009, I heard that the Shadowrun line developer position was open. So I went to GenCon and was kind of hoping I could get an interview and see if they would consider me for that position. And I got an interview and they hired me. So that's where I've been.
Okay, could you tell us about some of your work on BattleTech?
Yeah, so for a while, one of the things FanPro did, and not just FanPro, but In Media Race, which was a company that eventually became Catalyst, is they had a website called Battlecore where they would release BattleTech fiction. And so they were trying to build a subscriber model. So that meant they needed regular fiction. So I could keep submitting short stories, and a lot of times they would accept it. So I did a lot of short stories for the website. When FanPro and when WizKids were doing the MechWarrior Dark Age click game and the Shadowrun Duels figures, they had novels come out in connection with both of those lines. So I ended up writing 3 of the MechWarrior Dark Age novels and 1 Shadowrun novel, basically because there were 3 times as many or 4 times as many MechWarrior Dark Age novels as Shadowrun. We only got 6 Shadowrun novels out of that. So I kept writing fiction, and a lot of that came through In Media Race. So I knew I knew Lauren Coleman, who's now the head of Catalyst, and I knew all the people there, so that helped build a relationship.
Okay, could you tell us a little bit more about your work on Shadowrun and kind of what you have brought to Shadowrun and how you have shaped its legacy as a game itself?
I'm not comfortable talking about my legacy because I don't know. As you know, I can say what I tried to do, but everyone who plays the game will see what I brought to it and what they think of it. I guess one of the guiding principles that I've had is that I wanted anyone to be able to play Shadowrun no matter how they like to play games. Mm-hmm. So we've really worked to try to give a lot of people options on how you play Shadowrun. So we have the Crossfire board game, we have the Encounters, Push Your Luck dice game, we have the 2-player card game, Shadowrun 0 Day. We've got Sprawl Ops, the board game, and we also came out with Anarchy as a more narrative rule set. So, you know, if you want the heavier, more detailed RPG rules, great. We have Shadowrun 5, Shadowrun 6 for that. If you want a lighter set, we have Anarchy. I just love this setting so much. I want people to be able to engage with it however they're playing games. And since I was talking about fiction, that's kind of where the perspective I come from. I love games and I like designing games, but I really love building stories. And so I try to come at the game with an eye for stories. And that's one of the great things about working on Shadowrun is there's not really a lot of game settings left that have that evolving storyline like Shadowrun does, where you can keep telling a story that goes on and on and on for years, and you can build in a plot hook in one year that might not pay off for multiple years down the line. And it's really fun to see not only how you can make the stories evolve, but also bring in the input of other writers, so that it's not just me shaping the line. There's no way I could write all the books that come out for Shadowrun. There's no way I could come up with all the ideas that people have come up with Shadowrun. So part of what I need to do is be open to the ideas of all the writers so that they can help shape the world too. Just as one small example, the big major plot book, the first major plot book we did for Shadowrun 6th World Edition was called Cutting Black. And that plot line was the result of multiple conversations between writer R.J. Thomas and myself. And he was the one who took the initiative. He started the ball rolling. There were certain plot elements he wanted to do in the 6th World. And so we would have conversations and he'd say, this is what I want to do. And I'd say, okay, that's interesting, but can we push it this way? And then he'd come back with a good idea about how we could grow it and make it a larger storyline. And then sometimes the president, Lauren, would come in and say, it needs to be even bigger and more impactful. And it just kept iterating over time. And then when it came time to do the book, I gave him more significant development responsibilities because he'd shepherded the plot that far that he deserved to have a chance to make the book what he wanted it to be. And it wouldn't have been what it was without his talents and his vision going into the book. I needed someone else to contribute, not just make it my thing. So I guess if I have a legacy, part of it is that I'd like it to be that I open the door for lots of people to contribute ideas to Shadowrun 6th World, and I didn't want to make it just my thing.
Okay, you touched a little bit about this on the living timeline of Shadowrun, and when these different companies have got the license for Shadowrun, I think they've done pretty good at keeping the living timeline going of how things, like you said, planting seeds and letting them grow. Could you talk a little bit more about into the depth of that, of like how you do that as a creative team and how you plan that out ahead of time?
Never as much as we'd like to. I've said before, I think that one of the greatest disappointments I had when I became line developer is I wanted to receive the Book of Secrets, as I hoped that there was some file or some manuscript somewhere that said, okay, all these mysteries that we've planted over the years, here are the answers. Here are where the timeline was going. Here's what we wanted to do. So you know all the things that we planted and you know the truth. That didn't exist, and it still mostly doesn't exist. So yeah, I hope it isn't too disillusioning, but a lot of the world we make up as we go. Not all of it. There are seeds that we've planted that we get to watch grow into fruition. Like when we changed some of the matrix in between 4th edition and 5th edition. We had some discussions early on about what we wanted to do and some of the changes both to the matrix and to how nanoware and other types of augmentations would work. And so that gave us a lot of time to plant seeds in advance. So we built up some plot lines about how people were agitating to make more corporate control over the matrix. And that's a lot of fun to do, especially from a line developer point of view, as I don't have to shape an entire book. Just as other books are coming in, I can drop little seeds into it and little hints, and then they eventually come into flower in a full book. And we've done that with a lot of different plot lines. That's happening, I think, more now in SR6 than it did in SR5, because we took more time to build out some of these plot lines and make a plan. And it's not a fully detailed plan. It's still going to iterate and change and grow as we go along. But we got a chance to have more structure about where that first book, Cutting Black, was going to go and how some of the ramifications of that would play out. And so it's been a lot of fun continuing to follow those ramifications. I don't know entirely how they'll all play out. I've got ideas, but I need to involve the freelancers more. I need to talk to them more to get their ideas, just to see if A, my ideas are not bad, and B, if they have better ones.
Mhm.
So it continues to be an iterative process. I could involve and be more detailed about it and get the people more involved in a formal process, but the challenge with the game is always time. There's never enough time to do all the things I want to do.
I think that's every company has that problem, even not even in gaming, just in general.
Yeah.
So you mentioned freelancers. How do people get on as a freelance over at Catalyst?
They contact me somehow. Usually it's an email. Oftentimes that email comes as a follow-up to like a conversation at a convention or something. Someone will introduce and say they're interested at a convention, and I'll tell them to send me an email. What I ask whenever anyone is interested in being a freelancer is to send me a sample of about 2,000 words that they think exemplifies what they can contribute to the Shadowrun universe. If you have past credits, like you've done some writing before, that's useful because it tells me that at least you know some of the process, even if the Shadowrun process isn't the same as what you're used to, but you have some idea of how to write on a deadline and how to, deal with edits and all that. But it's not critical. If you have no writing credits and your 2,000 word sample shows me that you've got the ideas and the style that's really going to be an interesting part of the Shadowrun universe, then you'll be added to the freelancer pool. So I have a decent sized pool of freelancers. And then every time we have a book that's coming up, I'll put together a project spec for it. And that will have the outline of the book with all the chapters and the basic feel that I want the book to have. Send that to the freelancers with a timeline of when proposals are due and when the ultimate deadline of the book will be. And then they'll pitch to me about what chapters they want and what they would do with chapters. And based on the pitches I get and which pitches I like the most, and sometimes what writers I know will do a good job on certain chapters, then they get assignments from there.
So your creative development team for Shadowrun, I'm sure, is not as big as the old FAFSA days. Could you kind of describe the what your organization is like in the Shadowrun department over at Catalyst?
This is it.
And who else is
looking
involved?
At the Shadowrun department.
Oh wow!
Right.
I figured you'd be a little bit bigger.
No, we have a good group of people who work on different things, but as far as like full-time employees, it's me. There usually is a missions developer, so someone who's working on missions, and that person is very useful in assembling the writers who work on the missions and making sure I get the text, and then I need to work over the text and get it to the layout person. And there currently is an errata coordinator who's been very useful because as we get closer to a reprint of SR6, trying to make sure we have as much up to date as possible is useful. So we have those people. We have a dedicated Shadowrun art director, and he's been fantastic. Ian King, who did some quality Shadowrun art in previous books. You can look back through credits and see his name, is currently the art director for Shadowrun. And he does a really good job at not only finding artists and assigning them pieces, but helping them elevate what they do. But that, as far as the full Shadowrun team, that's it. I've got the freelancers, I've got the proofers, and it couldn't happen without them, and a good stable of editors. But none of those are all freelancers or volunteers.
Okay. What do you enjoy most about working on Shadowrun?
Working on Shadowrun. So the reason I was so insistent when the FAFSA editor asked me what property I wanted to work on is Shadowrun combined like my two major interests in genre fiction. I love fantasy. I love magic. and I'm also a big noir fan. And if you move the noir a little forward in the future and scuzz it up with some cyberpunk sci-fi, how great is that setting? That setting is so much fun to play with. And I like Battletech as a setting, but what I said before about the difference between working on Battletech and the difference on working on Shadowrun, if you're writing Battletech fiction especially, at some point you need to get people in a mech cockpit and the mechs need to start fighting. And it's not always easy to figure out a new way to write a mech combat fight after you've already done a few dozen. With Shadowrun, the possibilities are limitless. I've written hundreds of thousands of words for Shadowrun, and I don't feel I've come close to exhausting any possibilities for it. There's still so many ways the story can go, so many angles you can approach a story from, so many people to talk about, and it's just such a wide open, fascinating world. And I like the bottom up look at it, that you're on the streets trying to take on the powers of the world and trying to survive. I love that scrappy aspect. So it's just such a great setting. It was brought to life so well in the early books, and such a great attitude in the writing and the shadow talk, that it's always fun to dive in again and try to make the world come to life continually. It's just a great setting.
Oh, yes, it is. I've been a fan since the '90s myself. So, what do you think Catalyst Games impact on the Shadowrun game that will be the most impact will have in the future of the game?
Well, I think a big one is just making sure it had one. The future of Shadowrun wasn't always secure, and it wasn't always clear that a game would keep coming out as the license bounced around, and as it went from FAFSA to WizKids, and then WizKids was acquired by Tops. It wasn't clear that Tops had a lot of interest in making Shadowrun happen. So being able to continue it is a great thing, and being able to keep the flame going is wonderful. One of the reasons I wanted the job is to make sure books were coming out. The release pace wasn't always regular. It still isn't regular because I can't always keep up with my ambitions, but at least we managed to get 4 to 7 books out a year, and that wasn't always the pace. So I think part of the legacy is just maintaining the flame, and making sure Shadowrun exists for whoever wants to come and play it. But then the other part is what I said earlier, is that if however you want to play Shadowrun, we want you to play it that way. So trying to get Shadowrun out in a lot of forms, so that whatever form of gaming you like, you can play Shadowrun.
And who has driven you the most to excel as a game developer?
Me. The weird thing about working for Catalyst is, we have no office. I have no coworkers. The closest coworker I have is our fiction editor, who's 6 hours away in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And my actual bosses are about 2,000-ish miles away in the Seattle area. So there's no one hovering over me to make it happen. I have to make it happen. So I have to start myself. But I guess outside of that, it's just that I want people to have fun. So I want to make it good for the people that are playing. They've been loyal fans for a long time. They love the universe, and I want them to have fun things to play with. So it's trying to make it good for the people who play.
What has been your favorite part of being a games developer, and specifically working on Shadowrun?
I love the long form plotting. I love the chance when I get to sit down and say, what's going to happen in this plot over the next year or two. That's a lot of fun. I love the collaborative aspect. I like every year at Gen Con, we have a freelancer meeting. So all the freelancers that are there come to some hotel room, and then we Skype in whoever else can attend. And I love hearing the ideas that they come up with and the way they bounce off of each other and enhance each other's creativity is a lot of fun. And we come up with weird, crazy things that often don't quite make it into the game, but still inspire other ideas that do. And it's a lot of fun to try to see how you can develop the game and where you can push it and where it can go. And that kind of open creativity is the most fun part for me.
What has been the most challenging aspect of creating the current Shadowrun timeline?
um so the history is daunting. You need to try to keep up with decades of continuity, decades that frankly didn't always keep up with itself. And so you need to try to honor that while also moving it forward. But that's the other trick, is trying to move it forward while keeping it feeling like Shadowrun and feeling like cyberpunk. It's often been noted that, the roots of cyberpunk are in the 1980s, and Shadowrun 1 and 2 had very much of a 1980s feel to them. And that's not always an easy thing to evolve from. And I think cyberpunk has a lot to say that's relevant to current society, but it's not always easy to evolve in a way that feels like Shadowrun, but also feels more relevant. And technology also throws us for a loop. And that's why we had cyber limbs and all this stuff in Shadowrun that we still don't have today, but Shadowrun was kind of slow to get onto Wi-Fi because they didn't anticipate that when the first games were made. And then Wi-Fi came about well before it ever was introduced into Shadowrun. So we had to figure out how to, and I should say we, but most of this was done before I was line developer, how they had to figure out how you could bring wireless into Shadowrun so you weren't having a game where everyone's sitting around a table with their wireless devices playing where they have to plug into machines all the time. So the real world sometimes outpaces us, and we got to figure out a way to keep up.
On that one, the styling of Shadowrun has changed so much over the years. I was wondering about the creative process of going from 1980s, 90s futurism to the look you have today. Is there, do you have any insight into how this styling has progressed and evolved over the decades?
So a lot of that goes to the credit to our visual people. So Ian King, who I mentioned, is our Shadowrun art developer. Brent Evans, who is the overall art director for Catalyst, and Matt Hewitt, who does all the design and layout for the books. They're really good at building a visual language that feels contemporary in the book. And once you have those visuals that keep up, then that helps the prose feel more contemporary as well. So I'm not, I can appreciate a good visual, but I can't design one. If you've ever seen any of the April Fool's products we've done sometimes, when I
yes, I have.
Yeah,
Those are great.
we didn't want to burden Matt with actual layout of those joke products, and I did the layout. So you see the difference between someone who knows layout and someone who doesn't. So I just would kludge together whatever layout I thought looked cheesy.
I'm still waiting on that battle mech in Shadowrun.
So I don't have that talent, so I'm very happy to be working with people who do and can update it that way. But it's also prose wise, trying to get to the heart of what makes cyberpunk, and that goes beyond just the wires and the cyber decks and the hacking the matrix. Those are part of it, but what's really at the heart of it is our issues of power. When most of the power is the world is stacked against you, but you can get some small portion of power. What can you do with it that's meaningful, and what can you do with it that's useful? And that question doesn't go away. That question does not just live in the 80s. It continues to develop and be relevant to our time. So as we can try to get our plots and issues to reflect on that issue, it will feel more contemporary.
So for myself, who's more of a old school FAFSA era Shadowrun player, when I came to back into Shadowrun around fifth edition, you had a new archetype that was something new to me. For some of us older players, could you explain the Technomancer a little bit to us and how you guys came about thinking that? As I thought it was a brilliant idea myself.
I wish I could explain a lot of the thought process. That was before I came on, so that credit goes a lot to the Shadowrun developers at the time. So Rob Boyle, hats off to him for thinking of a lot of that and the people that he was working with. They did a lot of that. And I think part of the process was to evolve the otaku that had happened in earlier editions and make them fit in the wireless paradigm that they were designing for Shadowrun 4. So they wanted to take Shadowrun 4 wireless, and that's when they did a time jump from Shadowrun 3 to Shadowrun 4 to accommodate all the different plot things they developed. But it was a way to have someone that acted like a hacker but felt like a mage. And yeah, I think you're right that they did an excellent job, and it's a brilliant idea, and they're a really cool concept. So it's a way to kind of fill in a niche that their new matrix design opened up. Since they had wireless, why not have someone who could just contact the wireless matrix by their nature? And that's a great thing you can do, especially when Shadowrun doesn't have firm character types or character classes, is as the universe shifts, you can find characters that fit that niche that you've just developed.
Do you have any other archetypes like that in development that might pop up in the future?
Loosely. So we have a book coming up in mid 2022 that will be called Shadowcast. And that will be mainly focusing on archetypes that are different from the archetypes in the core rule book, and will hopefully be different from archetypes you've seen before, and flesh them out. That book, though, has not yet been spec'd out, so everything is loose in my head, so I can't confirm or can't comment on exactly what will be in it until I take some time to think about it and also hear what the freelancers have to say.
Well, fair enough on that. So I know you guys don't have control of the IP of Earthdawn, but is there any plans to collaborate with FAFSA Games on connecting the Shadowrun world with the Earthdawn world, like the horrors that are supposed to be coming up in the future, that they're an empire being the Atlanteans, anything like that?
No firm plans right now, just because, as you said, the copyright issues are weird, and that's the nice thing for FAFSA is that they own their IPs. We don't own the IP that we're working on. We license it from Tops. So we have to be a little careful about where we step and where we don't, so that they don't get annoyed with us. So we have no firm plans to work on that. If we can figure out, I've talked to people who've worked on Earthdawn or are working on Earthdawn, and they're excellent people, and I'd love to be able to collaborate with them. So if we can work it out, that would be great. We'll just have to see if we can make it work.
Okay. I noticed you worked on the Time of War Battletech RPG. Would you like to talk about a little bit of your inspiration, how you came about doing that, reworking the old MechWarrior system?
So Time of War, I think the only work I did on that was fiction. So I didn't work much on the mechanics. I did work on the mechanics of the latest MechWarrior RPG, MechWarrior Destiny.
Mhm.
And that was a lot of fun, because that was Brent Evans, who I mentioned as our art director, but also at the time was serving as Battletech line developer. And that was not long after Anarchy came out. And he wanted an RPG for Battletech that would use a simplified mechanic like Anarchy did. So when we made Anarchy, it was pretty simple to develop the core mechanic because we still stuck with the skill plus attribute dice pool that Shadowrun has been using for years and is familiar. But the challenge for MechWarrior Destiny was how could you make a mechanic that felt familiar to Battletech players? Because if we were building big dice pools of D6s, that's not what they do. So we wanted to do something that worked for them. Usually what you roll in Battletech is 2d6. Whenever you're rolling to hit or whatever, it's usually a 2d6 roll. So I made a concept paper about how a 2d6 mechanic could be your central role-playing mechanic for MechWarrior Destiny. And so got the concept together, and then once we had that, I did not have time to serve as full development, to do the full development for that book. So we handed that over to Phil Lee, who is a very capable designer and Battletech writer, and he ran with it and did an excellent job on fleshing that out. So that's the current MechWarrior role-playing system, and he did a great job making it happen.
Okay, are there any plans to do another model run for Shadowrun? Maybe a release at Gen Con or something like you have done before?
This Gen Con, no. Plans, they're loose. I haven't looked at what our stock is. The funny thing about that run of miniatures is that was a long time coming. We had that planned years ago, and miniatures manufacturing is an enormous pain in the hoop. And so we did not get it out until finally we had the opportunity to get it out when SR6 came out. So back when we were planning it the first time, we had a second set mostly planned and knew what we wanted to do with it. So once we're ready to pull the trigger, I think I know where we'll want to go with a second set, but I haven't heard that we're ready to pull the trigger yet.
Okay, if you could be any metatype or archetype, what would it be in Shadowrun?
Archetype is easy. Occult investigator. I love occult investigators. I mentioned that I'm a big noir fan. So being a private eye who summons spirits to get clues about the case I'm working on, I'm all over that. Metatype, being any kind of magic character, you kind of steer maybe toward elf, but that kind of makes me not want to be an elf because it's too on the nose. So human might be fun just to be kind of the grubby, nondescript person who gets beat up by orcs and trolls all the time and then comes back and takes another licking and doesn't get deterred. So that's probably what I do. I know human's kind of vanilla, but I like vanilla too. Human occult investigator.
Okay, is there anything you have always wanted to implement into the Shadowrun universe, but not yet have had the chance?
There were some things that I wanted to, but didn't because they turned out to be bad ideas. So I probably won't. There in when we were doing SR5, I had worked on a whole initiative system that would be based on action points. So very board game like, and it introduced a lot of cool mechanical possibilities because you could have a lot of actions that would give someone more action points or take away their action points. You could have interrupt actions while they're using their action points. There were a lot of cool mechanics that I wanted to have along with the action points. But every time we play tested the action points initiative system, the game just ground to a halt at combat. And the last thing Shadowrun ever needs is for combat to get slower. Mm-hmm. So after playing it myself a few times and hearing reports from playtesters, some of them kind of strong along the lines of, if this is a new initiative system, we will never play Shadowrun. That's the kind of comment I had to pay attention to. We scrapped that and went with the initiative system. I kind of desperately pinged all the freelancers saying, okay, so we're getting SR5 ready to go, but I need an initiative system. Anyone got one? And bless the freelancers' heart, some of them did. I think that was mainly Patrick Goodman who came up with it, and came up with the initiative system that we used there. And it was a much smoother and more fluid initiative system. And so that worked a lot better. So I really liked the idea and was sad that we couldn't put it in, but also I don't want to ever put it in because I know it doesn't work.
What is your favorite Shadowrun product you've worked on?
Oh, good heavens. It's asking me to choose from all my children. I've long had a liking for Street Legends. I thought writers did a really good job on a lot of the write-ups of the people in that. And it was kind of a challenging book to figure out how it was going to be relevant to players at the table, because when are you going to encounter, these high-powered characters? But the writers ended up making it so evocative of the world and put in so many interesting plot hooks into the characters' lives, and they just wrote those things up so well that I've always been a big fan of that book. I'm also a big fan of Court of Shadows because it let us take an entirely different sort of swing at the Shadowrun universe and try to translate it into high fantasy. And it also presented some really weird problems. Like if you want to do a high fantasy setting, adapting riggers, that's not too bad. They can just be riding horses and controlling animals. But what do you do with deckers in a high fantasy setting? And the writers came up with some fantastic ideas of kind of having these fairy messengers that would have messages in their head so you could hack them. And that was a fairy communication network. And so that gave the deckers something really solid to do. And just the whole way of reimagining Shadowrun archetypes in a high fantasy setting was a lot of fun. So those two are ones that I like a lot. Recently, though, I think Cutting Black turned out really well. And the follow-up, 30 Nights, where we got to do a campaign book that kind of took you through 1 month of a blackout, I thought was a lot of fun of how to look at different ways to build a campaign and doing it in a different way.
So Shadowrun does a lot of the mission stuff, kind of like the old Dunkelzahn campaign live play at different conventions. What was the idea about? Where'd you guys come up with that on bringing back these Shadowrun missions and running a campaign module like that?
So the main idea is to just give people an easy way to get into Shadowrun, so that if you want to know where can I play, or if you're going to play at a convention for the first time, or if you're going to run a game at a convention, then you can have a quick and easy thing that you can grab, start playing, or join in the game and make it easy to get into. The fact that we keep releasing, and I know missions release has been slow, and I'm entirely to blame for that, and I apologize. But the reason we build the plot arcs is it gives people a chance to follow a story, and also gives us a chance to build plots that then will affect the rest of the Shadowrun universe. And there were some really good things that happened in previous seasons. Some highlights were like when they did a whole campaign about the Orc Underground in Seattle trying to become a official district of the city of Seattle. And so that was an ongoing arc in the missions. And we at Gen Con, we had voting cards and let people cast votes for whether the underground should become a district. And our decision of what was going to happen was based entirely on the votes that came in. So we let the players choose in the end whether the underground would become a district or not. And it was a narrow vote, but it won by a bit. And so it is an official district of Seattle. And then when we did the Chicago missions, and I love this moment at a campaign, is that they were running the last of the big climax of the Chicago missions at a convention. And people had to like run up and tell me that one character was facing a dragon that was attempting to just destroy all of Chicago. And he had on a vest of grenades, and he pulled all the pins of them and threw himself into the dragon's mouth. so that he blew up and killed the dragon. And that was just, I love that. So of course we had to make that character canon, and we had to make that event as canon as we could, because how can you not pay tribute to that kind of player action in a game? That was awesome.
Yeah,
And so that's one thing we like from missions, is if we can build up to that kind of experience, that's great.
Yeah, that the whole grenade thing just I was like, wow, now I've lost my train of thought.
I want to do that in a game now.
Yeah, you got my
GM
gears rolling. So what is Catalyst? Do you have any kind of infrastructure of setting up games? I know some other companies have like forums to find players and GMs. Do you guys have anything like that?
Yeah, we've got our demo team. And so the website, I believe, is catalystdemoteam.com, and you can find games there. And so the demo team is always going out to conventions and finding or connecting people to games. Obviously, in the past year, things have been a little weird because everything's been weird in the past year. But with GenCon now coming up in just a month and a half, we're gearing up, and we'll have people running games there. And then the demo team will start spreading out again and running games at cons. So that's a good way to find a convention game. If you're just looking for a game at a store, sometimes you will find a demo agent running at stores. But Facebook and the forums at shadowrun6world.com are a good way to find players.
And I'll put those in the description of this video when I get it up. Any plans to bring back the Shadowrun card game?
Ooh, good question.
Yeah, I still have cards and I've never played, so I'm kind of hoping it makes a comeback.
Yes, there are very definitely plans to bring back the collectible card game. In fact, we've worked on a whole bunch of new art for it. Our wonderful layout person and design person, Matt, has designed a great new look for the cards. So we're just working on getting the rule book edited and ready, and then doing the final design elements of some boxes. So we're getting close on that, but we've been working on that most of the year. So it is coming.
I'm incredibly excited about that. Before we move on to fan questions, is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't talked about?
Just that we have a lot of fun things coming up. August and September is looking like there'll be a lot of fun Shadowrun stuff out there, and we've been trying to not only still do books because we love them, but also find other player aids and other ways to interact. So one of the things that turned out the best that I'm really excited about is a card deck called Shadow Points, and it has different locations, like specific buildings, like a high-end restaurant or a corporate headquarters, and it's on a card, and it's got an illustration of it, and it's kind of a cutaway illustration, so you not only see what it looks like on the outside, but you see some of the floor plan on the inside. And then the card details what security you'd find there, how many entrances you'd find in the building, and then some plot hooks about why you'd encounter this building or what would happen when you're in this building. And so I'm excited for those to come out. Those should be at Gen Con from what I'm hearing. And then the Rigger book is going to be at Gen Con. That's called Double Clutch, so the Rigger book for Shadowrun 6, and that will have a deck of cards along with it, called the Rides deck. So you'll have a whole full deck of vehicles and drones. And I liked the setup of 30 Nights, the campaign book, so much that we kind of copied it with a book called Assassin's Night. And it's not quite the same 30 days, but it's still a constrained timeline where you are placed in Barcelona. You know that some big major event is going to happen soon, and you have to figure out what it is and what you're going to do about it. And all I'm going to say is that it is indeed a major event. So major Shadowrun plot elements coming soon.
Okay. Before we go to fan questions, I have one more. What is Catalyst and mainly Shadowrun doing to become more inclusive, as a lot of games from the 80s have had a lot of criticism over the decades over this? What have you, especially as the line developer, have plans and have done and plan to do for that to get more inclusive in the gaming world?
Good question. So a lot of it has been looking at our rules and looking at places that didn't encourage inclusion or made people feel like they were not included, and trying to change that. One of the big ones was in augmentations and modifications for the body. Is for a long time, almost any modification would cost essence, and that was defined as making you less human. And so for people that might want to have a modification that lets their appearance represent what they feel is their what is their true gender, they didn't feel like they should lose essence for that, because you shouldn't become less human just by being transgender. So we changed that. First, we changed the definition of essence so it doesn't make you less human, but also you could get modifications, you could get some replacement limbs and some other modifications without losing any essence, because we didn't want people with disabilities, transgender individuals, to feel like that they were less than human. So that was a mistake from previous editions that we tried to rectify. We're trying to be more inclusive in who we show in art and in prose. So we want the characters to reflect the full range of human experience. So characters of different genders, including non-binary characters, characters of different races and ethnicities. So we want them to cover the full range. Shadowrun, in many ways, was interesting in its depiction of Native Americans, in that it did a good job of including them and giving them strength and power, but it didn't always do a good job of looking at what really made Native Americans distinct, and how many different tribes of Native Americans there are and what the differences there are. Sometimes it would just blend them all together. So we're trying to be more respectful of the different identities and different tribes within the Native American category. And then with orcs and trolls and dwarfs, a lot of times there's a parallel between them, between the way they're treated in Shadowrun and how minorities are treated, particularly in the United States. And that parallel became troublesome when the game rules stated that the mental abilities of orcs and trolls were different than humans and elves. So that was setting up a parallel that just was not at all what we wanted to convey. So in SR6, we changed that so the mental abilities of all metatypes are the same, and that's not. Yeah, so everyone has the same mental ability. You don't judge that way. So those are some of the things we've done.
I really like how you retconned that too, as it was the mental brain damage from the actual awakening and the change, not their actual their mental capability.
Yeah, and some of it was just the perception that people perceived them as being not as smart, and so that's what they thought. But as it turns out, they were wrong, and as people have done the cognitive research and said, oh, they weren't. They're just as capable as anyone. We've just thought that they weren't because of our own prejudices. So we kind of turned it back on the snooty humans and elves.
Too many companies just go, okay, we're getting rid of this. They don't explain why they got rid of it. So they did a very good job on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, kind of like in Battletech with the cartoon, where it was just that was actually propaganda, in-universe propaganda. So let's start on some of the fan questions, if you're okay with that.
You bet.
Okay, first one, we got AJ Delgado, who asked, "What are you covering more of the Caribbean and the Caribbean League, and expanding that information in the Sixth World?"
At some point, I don't know when, but if you look at how the plot went from Cutting Black, where the UCAS lost a lot of power and some power and influence flowed south to the CAS, that means that we will need to talk more about the southeastern region of what is currently the United States in our world and is the CAS and the Caribbean League in the Sixth World at some point. I don't know how we'll do that. There are a few plans in the hopper, but we'll see what works out.
I'm looking forward to that. As I plan on retiring down in Puerto Rico, so I'd love to see what it's
Ooh,
going to be
lovely.
like down there. I currently live in Portland, so I'm going to go from the Northwest, from where it's based, to down there.
That will
So,
be a big climate difference for you.
oh yeah. So, Mason Hart asks, after your years as line developer, do you see yourself as more of a caretaker, preserving the legacy of Shadowrun in the game, or an innovator and creating new concepts and guiding its direction?
So first, before I answer that question, I've talked about how we can't make Shadowrun without all the contributors and the people who make it work. So props to Mason Hart. Mason Hart is the most detailed proofreader on the proofing team. And he catches things that every time I read his documents, I'm like, how did I miss that? I should know that. But he catches it. He is a wonderful resource. And so props to him and thanks for all of his work. Um, it's a tough question. I think, I'll give the spineless answer of both. I think I have to be some of a caretaker because I am riding on the coattails of the people who invented this game and the people who made so many books that have inspired me and that I love. When I want to look at how you do plot hooks, I look at Portfolio of a Dragon, and that tells me that's how you want plot hooks to feel. And when I want to look at how you can put total horror in a game, I look at Renraku Shutdown. So I want to continue the legacy, and there's so many talented writers and artists and developers who worked on it. I was just telling my wife the other day that every time like I see Tom Dowd pop up on Facebook and like something I said about Shadowrun, I'm like, oh, good, he approved. I don't think he means it quite with the weight that I'm giving it, but still, it makes me happy. So yeah, I want to carry on their legacy, but it's important for Shadowrun to also break new ground and to try new things and to do different things. We want to keep it feeling like Shadowrun, but it can't be in the same cycle all the time. So it has to develop as the world develops, and we have to see what we can do that's different and unusual and gives people new and fun opportunities to play. So it's always looking for what we can do next and what would be fun that's different but honors the spirit that exists.
So, this is one from me. Is there any plans to actually uh, expand more on the coming horrors that are have been hinted at since the beginning of the Shadowrun universe? Is there any plan to develop that storyline in the future?
Not immediate ones, no. I haven't figured out a way to do that that makes me happy. I world threatening, I mean, the Shadowrun world is always in danger, but a world threatening monster is kind of a different category than the corpse who are always threatening the world. So I'd have to figure out a way to make that plot work that still feels Shadowrunning enough to me, and I haven't figured that out yet. Our Lauren, our president, pushes me on that sometimes because he likes the feel of kind of that lurking evil. So he'll keep pushing me to think about it and figure out a way to do it.
Um, I can never pronounce this your last name, so I'm very sorry. Spin Tor Mathes. I'm very sorry. I can't pronounce that one. Asks, uh, companies like Pegasus have released Shadowrun source books in other languages. Will there ever be English translations available for people of those books?
Um, Possibly, yeah. We've talked about that before. We haven't found, frankly, we haven't found the right translator yet. So once we have the right translator, that might help a lot. But we have to have that. But yeah, there is some interest in translating their things. They do good work, and so it'd be fun to make some of their things available to the English population.
Um, Alistair Frazier asks, what is Catalyst doing to improve distribution? Wow, I can't say that. Getting your work out there and available and promoting Shadowrun in other countries outside of North America.
Praying.
Right?
So I don't know. Hopefully, most of you who are watching this haven't had to deal with production and shipping. Production and shipping right now is a nightmare. there's a shortage of materials, there's shortages of paper, there's shortages of labor in different production facilities, and shipping is just messed up everywhere. There's a shortage of shipping containers. So logistics right now suck. And we're a small company, so we can't directly handle the logistics anyway. We rely on partners to help us out. So we have our distributor that distributes things mainly in North America, and then we rely on partners to distribute elsewhere. And so our capabilities are only what our partners can offer. And with everything being so difficult right now, it's tough. What we can do is keep trying to find partners, and we keep looking at ways to bring Shadowrun games out in other countries. So we have people actively producing Shadowrun materials in Germany, France, Japan. I know that SR6 is being translated for release in Brazil. They're working on a Russian version. And I don't know what the Italian status is, but we had an Italian partner. So hopefully, as those partners are ramping things up, they'll be able to get materials out in those countries. But we have to depend on partners, and it's a tough time for anyone right now.
And I believe that person was specifically from the UK. Do you know anything about that in particular?
No, that again, that's a distribution question. So that's how our distributors work with distributors in the UK. So that I don't know much about that side, except for the fact that shipping right now and transportation and everything is a nightmare.
Sorry, I got to Baron Atomy. That's, I think I said that right. Adam with a Y. Atomy. Are there any plans to make cyberware, gear, vehicles, and other non-magical equipment? Basically, are you going to make the Awakened a little bit more balanced to, or the non-awakened, the mundane, more balanced to the Awakened?
Sure. So the nature of the plot line and the fact that we had kind of a somewhat magic focused plot line with Cutting Black, and just where that was going to go meant that we needed to do the magic source book pretty early on. And then we did the rigging one just to show riggers love, because they often have to wait until late in the edition to get their special source book. So we wanted them to not have to wait. But that means that matrix and augmentation source books will be coming up, and that we'll be looking hard at ways to make sure that augmented characters, hacking characters have what they need so that they can feel capable out on the streets.
Okay. Puri Damas asks, what would you, or hold on, let me read that. I sorry, I misspelled some stuff. Perry DeMoss would like to know what's on the pipeline to come for Shadowrun.
So I mentioned some of the immediate books, Assassin's Night and Double Clutch. After Double Clutch is a book called The Kichibi Code. That's a plot book. I don't want to give too many elements about it, but it's a global spanning plot. You'll visit Lagos, Nigeria. You'll visit the Scott Sprawl. You'll visit Hong Kong. All about finding out what the Kichibi Code is, what it does, and how Shadowrunners should use it. So that's a fun book. Lots of cool nuggets in there, and that will set up also some of the Matrix-based plots that will accompany the Matrix book in the future. Then we are just finishing up a book called Emerald City. That's the Seattle book for SR6. So you'll get what's going on with the newly independent Seattle in that book. Then I have just sent out the spec, and I'm getting proposals for the Sixth World Companion. So the player's companion book. So more character creation methods, more meta types, more qualities, infected, shapeshifters, all that fun character stuff. And then the book I mentioned earlier, Shadowcast, which will have archetypes that I need to plan. Another fun thing that just kind of recently came up as a thing we get to do is a reprint of SR6 of the core book. So we're updating all of the errata into that, but we also wanted to see if we could include something special so that we make a special new edition. And what we decided to do was make what we're calling the city edition of SR6. So the first one will be the Seattle City Edition. So it will have bonus content in the back of the book that will have some material about why it's fun to play in Seattle. It'll have short fiction about Seattle. It'll have a bunch of qualities that are specific to runners who came up in Seattle, especially from different districts. It'll have a bunch of contacts that are specific for Seattle, and then some plot hooks to use those contacts, and a few new rules in there as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that all comes together. And with any luck, that will be at Gen Con.
Oh, nice.
Fingers crossed.
Let's hope. Angie Boiling asks, are there any plans to reprint old FAFSA and Catalyst out of print Shadowrun books?
So as far as doing a full print run, no, just because the sales likely wouldn't justify the cost. What we've been trying to do is put them on Drive-Thru RPG and activate the print on demand option so that you can buy a print on demand copy from Drive-Thru RPG. So there are a number of source books there that have that option. The trick is finding a good enough quality PDF that we can sell and then make into a POD. Because we have PDFs of a lot of books, but some of them are really bad. Some of them, bless their heart, someone took a scanner and scanned in a few hundred pages of SR2 source books. So we've got them in PDF, but they're not at the quality that would work for even selling them as a PDF, and certainly not as making a POD. So if we can find the time to improve the quality of the PDFs we have, then we can put more on sale, but that's a tricky thing.
Okay, Austin Beeman asks, are there any plans for future Anarchy releases?
Did I not mention that? How did I not mention Anarchy when I was mentioning all the upcoming stuff?
You mentioned some of it, but I don't think you mentioned it in upcoming things.
Yes. So ideally, we'll do one Anarchy release a year, and there is one that is almost done. This was the brainchild of our beloved freelancer and podcasting friend, Opti. He came to me and said he wanted to take some of the classic Shadowrun adventures and put them into an Anarchy format so that you could play through some of the classics in Anarchy. So the book is called Anarchy 2050. It is all edited. Art is in process. Some of the art is done. The cover's being worked on and look good. So since it's a PDF, the great thing is it doesn't take a long time between when it's done and when it's in your hands. So I would imagine it will be released in a few weeks.
Oh, wow. I'm going to actually have to pay attention for that one, as I love all those old classics.
Well, that's why Opti did it, because he loves those classics. So it's done with a love and reverence toward him.
Oh yeah, I watch his podcast on his old school playthroughs. They're a lot of fun. Mike Fortain asks, wants to know what is your wow. I cannot read right now. I'm very sorry. I should have drank more coffee before this. He wants to know about what are your plans for the future of the Shadowrun timeline?
Oh, that would be telling. So if you look at Cutting Black, and if you look at Slipstreams, you should see enough clues to know where some things are going to go, or at least some questions that we have to answer. So especially look at the connections between Cutting Black and Slipstreams and where that points. And that will tell you where we need to go. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Shadowrunner never tells. Randy Prince asks, what live appearances are you going to be making at conventions in the near future?
Oh, he's a sly dog, that Randy. So I will be, of course, at Gen Con. If you're at Gen Con, I am pretty much planted in the Catalyst booth whenever the Catalyst booth is open. Find me. I look like this, but usually have glasses on. And I hopefully will be at Origins, which is only a few weeks after Gen Con this year. And then the good people at the Ice and Dice convention in Cincinnati in January have invited me to be a guest there. So I will be running some games, which is great because I don't usually get a chance to run games at Gen Con and Origins. So I'll run SR6 at Ice and Dice. And hopefully by that point, I'll have announced another game I'm going to be working on and I'll run that.
Okay, Brian C. Hillard asks, what principles from previous editions does your development team plan on carrying into the future?
Always obfuscate the truth. one of the greatest innovations they made in Shadowrun books was Shadow Talk, where you can have your cake and eat it too. So you can develop one line of the truth in the main text, and then have the Shadow Talk completely blow it up and point you in another direction. So players and game masters can follow whichever path feels like more fun to them. So I think having that is a great tool. You know, sometimes we do need to answer questions because having unresolved mysteries forever is no fun. But having some ambiguity so people can fill in the blanks is good too. Handfuls of D6s are where truth is. That's another principle we plan on continuing. I will, as long as I'm involved with Shadowrun, it will involve handfuls of D6s. Sometimes we'll try to make those handfuls more manageable so you're not overwhelmed, but you're going to be rolling D6s. And just looking at power from the bottom up, looking at how the little guy has to survive in all the attempts to be squished. So what do you do to survive? And do you have to compromise? What compromises do you have to make? Or what can you do to build your own power in a world that's against you?
Okay, David Ross asks, what would like to know about any possible future video games that might pop up. I'm not sure if your department is even in charge of that
So
licensing.
would I.
Yeah,
No, that's a question we get a lot, and I totally understand it because Shadowrun is so visually dynamic and so great at team based, and we've had some good video games. The Harebrained Schemes people did a fantastic job. That it's only natural to want more, but the trick of that is that the license belongs to Microsoft. So back in the day, Microsoft bought FAFSA Interactive, and so they retained the video game rights to FAFSA properties. So they have the rights, and that is, so we not only do we not have the rights, but we're generally not at either a money level or a skill level to compete to bid for them.
okay.
So we hope that Harebrained Schemes or other people do good things.
Yeah, I enjoy. I'm actually wearing one of the video game shirts now. I've enjoyed those games quite a bit. Um, Even the old '80s Super Nintendo one was fantastic.
Yeah, good stuff.
Jay Manuel asks quite a few questions here, and these would be the last few, I think. What is the process by which authors and artists and other contributors are selected for guides and adventures?
So the first thing they have to do is get in the pool, and that's usually by contacting me, or you can reach out to our art director, Ian King. And if you need to reach out to the art director, just reach out to me, Jason at catalystgamelabs.com. That's my email. Now you know it. Use it, and don't insult me in email. Why would you do that? No. Email people are usually very, very nice. So email me, I'll ask for a sample and read it. And then if you get added to the freelancer pool, you'll get a chance to pitch for books. And sometimes freelancers also come up with their own ebooks ideas, and that's a little more open. So instead of me having to develop the idea, they can pitch for something they're interested in and write that.
Okay. He also asks, are there any plans to have a all-in-one collection of past modules in a printed form?
Not at the moment. Part of that's the logistics I mentioned before, and also just the cost of a print run probably wouldn't be justified. If there are bundles that we could put together, and this is something probably I could ask some people to drive through, if there's different ways we could bundle PDFs, or especially bundle a POD of some of them, that might be interesting. So that's a good question. I'll pursue it.
Is there anything you would like, or is there anything you would, if you could change about the Shadowrun timeline, would you? And what is it?
I mean, if I really wanted to tinker, maybe, but it's in all of its ungainliness, it is what it is, and so I just take it for its wonderfully chaotic, massive self, and instead of worrying about changing the past, just figure out what we're going to do next.
Last question from J Manuel is, what are some of the real world technological advancements, kind of given in a general sense, that you would like to incorporate in Shadowrun that haven't been incorporated?
I've gotten most of the ones that I like in there. There's some cool stuff in the rigger book and double clutch about kind of malleable forms. Firing squad, the combat book, got some cool weapons technology in that. I'm worried about what watch list I'm on when I keep looking for future weapons tech in Google. Not as bad as the time I looked up how to blow up a building and building blueprints within like minutes of each other. So I don't know that I have a lot on my radar that I haven't gotten in yet. Most of the stuff I've gotten in, there's a few forms of vehicles that maybe we haven't gotten just because they're kind of impractical. Some of those like uniball roller things, they're wacky, but we've gotten some of them in too. So I think we've gotten a lot of what's been on my mind in.
Are there any plans for? No, a lot of the releases from Catalyst have been more technical oriented in the past, like equipment, gear, spells, and stuff like that. Game mechanics too. Are there any plans for like pure source books, or combining the two a little bit more, kind of growing the world and the lore of the universe?
Yeah, we've been. I think 6th edition has had a little more of that than we were able to do in 5th. In 5th, a lot of that was in the Deep Shadows book, where there were more mechanics put in hybrid. But 6th has gone back to a couple of more purely plot source books. We started with No Future, which was almost all flavor, and the Neo Anarchist Streetpedia, and Cutting Black and Slipstreams are primarily plot oriented. Kichibi Code, not quite the same because that has more NPCs, but there will be some more world building books. Certainly Emerald City is mostly building up the city of Seattle rather than has some mechanics, but not a ton.
Okay, well, I want to thank you for being on All Ones. Is there anything else you want to say before you go?
I don't think so. Thanks everyone out there who's interested in playing and reading and just loving Shadowrun. We appreciate you. And oh yeah, if you do want flavor, just don't forget that we've got a lot of fiction that keeps coming out. Just released 2 of Rusty Zimmerman's fiction books on audio format, and there's plenty of other good fiction coming. We've got stuff from Rusty, we've got stuff from R.L. King. I believe Brian Steele and Malik Toms have novels coming out or novellas. So lots of good stuff in the fiction pipeline. So keep your eye on that.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and you have a good day.
Thank you very much for making the time for me.
That sound means Great Overwatch is on their way. We need to change host. Until next time.